All right, before I go any further, I do want to say that we are going to have communion on Sunday. We are very excited about it. It will be obviously the most different communion that that any of us have ever experienced. But what we're asking folks to have some bread or some crackers or some potato chips or something there that you can use as the body to represent the body of Christ, and some juice or some Coke or some Dr. Pepper or something to represent the blood of Christ. I say Dr. Pepper and potato chips because I wasn't a part of it, but I have heard of another church that, well, they were doing it with their youth group, and that's what they had. They had Dr. Pepper and potato chips. And so that's how they shared communion. And I think the most important thing, especially as Baptists, is that these are things that represent Christ's body. These are symbols. And so there's a neat part of this symbolism that we're all coming from different places and we're all bringing whatever we have. But God can take whatever we bring and make it into something that's very, very meaningful for all of us. So we'll give you directions on when to take it during the service. We'll actually do that close to the end of the service, but I did want to mention that. We put that in the emails, and then we'll remind folks again of that just leading up to Sunday. Make sure you've got something that you can use, and then we'll be able to participate in the Lord's Supper as we go through that part. So, all right, tonight we're going to look at a different part of Jacob's story. And to be honest, this is the first time I've ever truly taught this Bible lesson. I don't know. I never taught this when I was at Dillon Christian because it's one of those stories we just didn't have as much time for. But we're going to look at the story of Jacob's ladder and its significance in Jacob's story and all of our stories. So I'm going to share my screen with us and start there. So dreaming on the journey, Genesis Reloaded. All right. So as we're dreaming on the journey, we're going to look at Jacob's dream. But before we look at Jacob's dream, let's talk about our dreams. What dreams have you had throughout your life? What are some big dreams that you've had? Anybody? Nobody wants to share any dreams? Are y'all muted? Can you unmute? Lolita, can you unmute? Or I want to check and see. Yeah, okay. Because I may have hit mute on anything. Okay, we don't have to share any dreams. Okay. Reflect on your dreams. How about that? And then, what dreams do you still have? So the thought process here was, what are some dreams that you had throughout your life, that were fulfilled? I think of, dreams to have kids. I remember we went to Ashley's brother, one of his basketball games, and his best friend's older sister had just had a baby. I don't know, the baby was probably about 3 months old. And the grandfather was sitting right beside us, and he said, "Thomas, hold Mackenzie." And I'm like, I don't do babies. I don't know how to hold babies. I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. This is too scary. He's like, no, Thomas, hold Mackenzie. And I'm like, okay. And I just held this little child, and Ashley and I, we had been married for probably, I guess, about 2 years or so at this point. And I'm like, I have got to get me one of these. It was an incredible feeling. And I was like, Ashley, like, we need to have a baby. And she's like, we're both in graduate school. I'm like, that's true. So the prayer was, okay, when one of us gets out of graduate school, we won't try to have a baby until we're almost somebody's close to getting out of graduate school, and it worked out that way. Julianne was born May 1st. I graduated from Campbell May 8th. But yeah, just think of those dreams, and a dream to be a pastor, dreams to be closer to family and those sort of things. And then dreams that you still have. I think of, I still have a dream, and Allison, I think you may have jumped on here. I have a dream to do what Allison is doing and finishing up and getting my doctorate, specifically at Campbell, and so I don't have to worry about that dream right now. I can still dream about it, but that's just something that's in my heart that I went into Campbell Divinity thinking, I want to make sure I'm able to go and get my doctorate later on. So I think it's important for us to remember that dreams are a part of life, and the dreams that we have, that we had when we were younger and that we still have today, help shape us into the people that we are. What do we dream about? I think we dream about things we don't have, things that may be attainable, right? Something that I'm like, I really don't think I could do that, but for me, like building something out of wood, like that could happen, although it's probably not going to turn out that way, and I'm probably not going to try to do it. It may be attainable. But there's another thing that I dream about as well, and that's continuing the good things in our life. A lot of times, I've said at different points throughout my kids' lives, I wish I could just hit pause for maybe a year or two at this stage. I think of that stage when they're 4 years old and their personality is so bright and they can pretty much take care of themselves and brush their teeth and take care of themselves, feed themselves. But they're just so much fun, and there's just so much kid left in them. And, I dream about just being able to continue that. I know that's not possible, but it's still a good dream to have and a good process to have there. Any thoughts or comments before we go any further there? All right. Well, let's go on to our and talk about Jacob and Jacob's dream at Bethel. Now, before we read the scripture, I do want to point out a couple things, and a couple things I really learned as I was going through this. Like I said, I've never really studied this story before. I'm like, yeah, it's Jacob's dream. The angels go up and the angels come down and God speaks and all that sort of thing. But I'd never really studied it in depth until I was really preparing for this Bible study tonight. And up to this point, there's no record of Jacob having a deep relationship with God. Now, what does that mean? We don't know. I mean, he probably had prayed before and that sort of thing. But this is the Bible's first recorded conversation between Jacob and God. The first example that Jacob is actually having a relationship with God. And he did mention God's name once before in Genesis 27:20. And that's when he's trying to trick his father. So he's dressed up like Esau. And he says, the Lord your God gave me success. Now, I wanted to point out a couple things there. Obviously, he's in the middle of lying to his father, so I don't know that he's calling on the name of the Lord and necessarily the best of circumstances here. But if you look at that verse there again, the Lord your God, he's talking to Isaac, and he's saying, look, this is your God. Not necessarily, he's not claiming God as his own in this verse here. And another interesting point that I didn't realize there was this is the first time that we see Jacob by himself. He's always in a relationship either with with Esau or Rebekah or with Isaac. This is the first scene where Jacob is by himself. And we do learn a lot when we're by ourselves, don't we? I know we're spending a lot of time with family right now, but we're also spending I'm spending different time by myself, time that I would typically spend with other people. I'm in a room by myself. And so this is the first time that we see Jacob by himself, and we learn a lot about him in the middle of this part of it. So let me go to these first few verses here. Genesis chapter 28. And if you've got a Bible, it will be good, or you can pull up a Bible on your phone or something. I didn't put all the verses up here tonight. So if you open a Bible, that would be a good thing, because like I said, all the verses won't be up here. But these first three are: Jacob left Beersheba and set out for Haran. When he reached a certain place, he stopped for the night because the sun had set. Taking one of the stones there, he put it under his head and lay down to sleep. He had a dream in which he saw a stairway resting on the earth, with its top reaching to heaven, and the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. All right, so what do we have here? We have Jacob leaving. He left, remember, because Esau vowed to kill him, and his mama said, well, you better run back to my brother Laban and get away, because Esau means it. So he's going away, and he stops at this certain place, and he takes this rock and he puts it under his head, and he has this dream, and these angels are going up and down, and there we go. All right. So initial thoughts here. Jacob is on a journey. Anybody else feel like you're on a journey right now? Right? And this is a journey where we're like, where's the roadmap? And I think the answer to that question is, where's the roadmap for today, right? Because we're going to get some different instructions tomorrow and those sort of things. So we are all on a journey. So as I was originally, let me back up. Originally, I was going to do just a half a Bible study on this part, on this story. And then God just kept showing me more and more about how this relates to us right where we are. So Jacob's on a journey. And you got to remember, Jacob is on this journey, and he doesn't have any animals at this point. He doesn't have any friends. He doesn't have any servants with him. He's all by himself, going to a land that he's never been to, trying to find some family members that may take him in or may not. And things are not looking good. He is in a very vulnerable place. The future doesn't look very bright, especially his immediate future. Now, his long-term future, he's got the blessing and he's got the inheritance. But what good is that going to do him right now, right? And so I think we can really relate to that right now. It's like our immediate future, next week, it doesn't look like things are going to be magically better next week. So I think we can relate to Jacob on this part. And the other part is he's vulnerable. The only thing he has to lay his head on is a stone. And that just really gets my attention, because he is in a very vulnerable position. The other thing that really stood out to me, or something else that really stood out to me, he stopped in an ordinary place and picked up an ordinary rock. I mean, there was nothing, he didn't notice anything special about this place, and certainly nothing special about that rock. Maybe it was smoother than the others. I don't know. Maybe it was just the right size for the height that he needed for his neck. But he stopped in an ordinary place to pick up an ordinary rock. And he had no idea how much he would be changed when he got up from that place. He had no clue that he was about to have this incredible conversation and interaction with God. And I think about that with where we are. A couple months ago, I would never have known as much about God or as much about ourselves as I do know today. If you told me on a Wednesday I would not leave my house for an entire day on a Wednesday, I would say that I must have been incredibly sick, or something must have happened to me or my car or something like that. I don't think I would have thought it would have been possible. And yet I've learned that we can live on less. But Jacob had no idea how much he would be changed when he got up from that place. And then this stairway and this ladder. Um, one of the things that stood out to me in the commentary was that the ancient ziggurats, these were temples that they had in the ancient Middle East. And I pulled up a picture of one. This ancient stairway that Jacob is talking about, it definitely can be thought of in terms of these ziggurats. And this is a picture of one there. And this is a ramp, a stairway, a ladder to heaven. And it was seen as this avenue to where the folks from the ordinary human realm could ascend and have a conversation with the divine realm. The priest would go up to the top, receive a divine message, and then come down and relay that message and bridge the gap between the divine and the ordinary earth. And I think that's a powerful image for how Jacob goes about this, because he is about to receive this message from God in this. So I've talked a lot there. Other thoughts from the very beginning, verses 10 through 12 there. All right. Well, let's keep on going. And into that, God speaks. And I didn't put this verse up here. Verse 13. There above it stood the Lord, and he said, I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham and the God of Isaac. I will give you and your descendants the land on which you are lying. Okay, so he says, there above it, or there beside him. Now, I want to step out of this real quick and see if I can go over here. As I was doing the commentary reading, it pointed out that there's two interpretations for this verse for above it. Look at the NIV. The NIV says, there above it, above the ladder, stood the Lord. The NRSV is the second one here, and it says, and the Lord stood beside him and said. English Standard Version goes back to, and behold, the Lord stood above it, the ladder, and said. But then the Message translation all the way over here says, then God was right before him. Now, which one is correct? Well, both of them are legitimate translations, because if you look here, each one has a footnote here. The NIV says they're above it with a footnote A, or they're beside him. And the NRSV says, and the Lord stood beside him, and another interpretation is, or stood above it. The commentators pointed out that because of the way God speaks to him, the commentator prefers this translation, the Lord stood beside him, or as Eugene Peterson put it, the Lord was right before him. And I think the immediacy of God in this is very important, because God stood right in front of him. God was right there with him. And it's amazing to me every time I think about the fact that God was, speaking to him like that. All right, so let's go back to this. God speaks into this. And the thing that amazes me about this the most is that God came near to Jacob. What did Jacob do to initiate this conversation?
Nothing, as far as we know.
Nothing. God initiated the meeting. Jacob was asleep. I don't initiate a lot of things while I'm sleeping. I guess you can initiate something. I had a friend who would sleepwalk, and they, went outside of their house and set the alarm off. They initiated that. But it's hard to initiate things while you're asleep, especially conversations. Now, plenty of us talk in our sleep. And that sort of thing, but I don't know that if you can carry on a coherent conversation with somebody that's sleep talking, then you have a special skill that I've never seen before. So God initiates this meeting. And the messengers, the angels, they didn't speak. In fact, the commentators point out their background, like Jacob is dreaming about these angels that are going up and down, these messengers that are going up and down, but the messengers don't carry the message. God is the one that carries the message. And then the power of how God begins this message is that he identifies himself. I am the Lord. And he uses Yahweh here. And he identifies himself as the personal God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And then he says, in relationship to them, I am the God of your father Abraham and the God of Isaac. Now, it's interesting there. Do you see anything interesting there? Who was his father? Isaac. Isaac was his father, right? But God says, I'm the God of your father Abraham and the God of Isaac. He's tying him back to Abraham here and his direct relationship to his grandfather. And I think it's important for us to remember that our relationship with God is between us and God, but the impact, it's hard to put a value on how impactful our parents and our grandparents and even our great-grandparents were on our faith. And so that's very important for us to remember, is that our family impact, the impact that our family had on our faith is very crucial there. And then God immediately shifts to his promises. Any other thoughts there before we move on to the promises? All right. Picking up there in verse 13, God gives God gives Jacob a series of 8 promises in these verses. The first one is, I will give you and your descendants this land. This is how I'll read this off and then I'll put them up. I will give you and your descendants the land on which you are lying. Okay, so I will give you this land. Verse 14, your descendants will be like the dust of the earth. So the second thing is that he'll have many descendants. And you will spread out to the east, to the west, and to the east, to the north, and to the south. The third promise, you will spread out in this land. In other words, they're going to be able to have all of that land. All peoples on earth will be blessed through you and your offspring. This was a continuation of God's promise to Abraham. Remember, God promised, I will bless you, and all peoples on earth will be blessed through you. And so God is carrying on these 4 promises. Now, these 4 promises are all about the future. There's nothing in this that that are immediate promises. If Julianne came to me and she says, Dad, I'm really hungry. I said, Julianne, I understand that. And don't worry. Next week, we're going to have dinner. I promise. We will have dinner next week, and it's going to be really good. In fact, it's going to be the best dinner you've ever eaten. She would not be amused. She would say, April Fool's, Dad. I don't like this. I don't like this game. What good is it right now? I mean, in his vulnerable state of where he's in, he's like, well, what good is this land going to be? Okay, so what is that going to mean for me? I'll have lots of kids. Well, I don't have enough food for myself right now. And all peoples on earth will be blessed. I'm just trying to make it through myself. I'm not trying to be a blessing for everybody else right now. But I think it's important that we realize that God is starting with these big things about his future. Like, look beyond this moment. I want you to stop and realize beyond this moment that I have big things in store for your life, and that I'm capable of taking care of you in providing some things that you're not even praying for right now. But God doesn't just stop there. He doesn't just give him a lot of non-tangible things, untangible things that aren't going to help him. The next 4 things deal with something very immediate in Jacob's journey right where he is. So listen to what verse 15 says. I am with you. God says, I promise my presence. I am with you and will watch over you wherever you go. Now, I think it's important here. God's saying, look, I'm with you and I'm going to watch wherever you go. He continues on, and I will bring you back to this land. I'm giving you these promises and I'm going to follow through. I'm actually going to carry you through on this entire journey. And then I will not leave you. I will not leave you until I have done what I promised you. So powerful, these powerful promises. And I want you to think about this. In just a few verses, Jacob has gone from not knowing God to receiving all these promises without saying a word. And that really struck me. Jacob has really just, his eyes have been opened. He hasn't said a word, and God has appeared to him. He is talking to him, and then he's given him all these promises. And that is so important. So thoughts there before we go on.
Wasn't that a lot like Jesus? Is that he promises you the future, the life everlasting, and then he goes back and says, I'm always with you. You believe in me, and you have these things, and it's kind of the same thing.
Absolutely. Yeah, I hadn't made that connection there, Don, but that is a great connection that Jesus does promise us life everlasting, but he doesn't just wait till we die to start interacting with us and speaking to us and leading us. That's a great point. Other thoughts? All right. Well, let's keep on going. And Jacob's response. Verse 16, listen to what verse 16 has to say. Verses 16 and 17. When Jacob awoke from his sleep, he thought, surely the Lord is in this place, and I was not aware of it. He was afraid and said, how awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God. This is the gate of heaven. He recognized the holiness of the moment. Surely the Lord is in this place, and I was not aware of it. Now, I want to stop there for just a second. He didn't realize that it was a holy place when he laid down, but he realized that God was there, and that's what made it holy. Now, I want to ask you a question. How has your being quarantined, obviously not something that we wanted, not something that we chose, how has God shown up in this moment for you and made it holy?
I think it's made us all think more on God's promises, on who he is, on what he is, and realize that he is the person that is in control of everything.
Absolutely. To focus more on how big he is and what he promises, how much he sustains us every day. Absolutely.
I think it's kind of like Jacob's response is sometimes we don't realize the holiness of the moment until it happens. It's not something we plan for. The moments when the youth call and they say, hey, I need to talk with you about something, or I just want you to pray with me on the phone, which completely blew my mind. But I was glad that they reached out and were able to do that, and it didn't come when we were standing in the church building. You know, it hit me at that moment. I was not expecting it, but then to say, you know, something's going right.
That's right. And there's something about it happening in the middle of the ordinariness of life, right? Right? It just happens in that ordinary day. There wasn't anything special in this ordinary place, but God showed up. And I guess the question for me is, am I looking for him in the ordinary things? Am I looking for this great revival, this incredible worship service where God just comes down and manifests himself in front of me, and I feel so in tune with him? Or is it in something as simple as walking around my house? I looked out on the porch, and the kids, I guess it was sometime last week, one of those absolutely gorgeous days last week, and all three kids were out playing in the yard. And I looked out there. Actually, I looked at Facebook, and one of my friends had posted a picture of the sunset. And they're like, look at this. Look at the beauty. And they had stopped to take a picture of it. And I didn't take a physical picture. Actually, I think I did take a physical picture of the kids out in the yard, because I'm like, I want to remember this moment, because this is holy. The fact that all three kids can be out in the yard on a school night, and it's absolutely beautiful, a beautiful night. God showed up there. It was holy. Now, about 10 seconds before, it was just completely ordinary. And then all of a sudden, I realized that God was there, and that's when it really came into view for me. Any other thoughts there? All right. And then I'll read on a little bit further. He set up an altar. This is the second part of Jacob's response. Early the next morning, Jacob took the stone he had placed under his head and set it up as a pillar and poured oil on top of it. He called that place Bethel, though the city used to be called Luz. Then Jacob made a vow, saying, if God will be with me and will watch over me on this journey I am taking, and will give me food to eat and clothes to wear, so that I return safely to my father's household, then the Lord will be my God. And this stone that I have set up as a pillar will be God's house. And of all that you give me, I will give you a tenth. Okay? He set up an altar. And I think that's a really a powerful image for us, especially right now. He poured oil on the rock. And two things that stood out in the commentary from that, it set the rock apart. Obviously, it made the rock holy in Jacob's eyes, but it also stained the rock. I didn't think about the oil staining the rock. So the next time he comes back here, that rock is going to stand out. He's like, that's the one I poured the oil on, because it has been stained. And I think of how God leaves his mark on our lives and on our days as well, and how we want to remember things. I mean, I highlight verses in my Bible, and a lot of times I'll write something in the margin there, because it really just stood out to me. It was a holy message from God, and the next time I come back to it, I want to remember what God said. And Jacob set up this altar for that same reason there. And this stone will be God's house. Anybody missing God's house right now?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
It is so different. This Sunday afternoon, I don't know. I got home, and I was trying to figure out what was going on inside of me. I was tired and that sort of thing. I was more tired than a normal Sunday, and I couldn't figure out why. And of course, being an extrovert, I get, being extroverted, you get energy from being around people, right? That's the biggest thing. Introverted people, it drains them. Extroverted people, it's like I've just been plugged into a light socket, and I'm really ready to go. And I think I was missing my people fix, right? I'm missing, even though I'm in God's house and I get to worship in God's house still, it's still not the same. And I think it's interesting that Jacob set up this rock and then left it behind and saying, this is God's house, but I have to go on this journey. I don't know. That just spoke to me as I was going throughout this week. And how important are sanctuaries for worship? Why do we need a sanctuary? the commentators pointed this out. Specific places of worship are needed because human beings are shaped by place as well as time. Our sanctuary provides order, discipline, and focus. I know the first week that we did the live stream, I said, Ashley, what did you think about this part of the service? She's like, I didn't hear it. I'm like, well, what happened? She's like, well, Mac was doing this, and I was trying to figure out what was going on with him and what was going over here, and it was just too much. And I was like, oh. So our sanctuary provides that place for order and discipline and focus, and our eyes see even when our eyes wander, they can wander to the cross behind me, or they can wander to the stained glass on the sides, or on what's on the Lord's Supper table, our Lenten wreath right now. It still provides that place for our imagination and our focus to go. Sanctuaries provide a tangible aspect to worship, that thing that we can feel and that physical place where we can worship. And I loved what the commentator said here, assurance that God is indeed present in this place. I miss that about us all being together and being in the church, because that's when you know that God is indeed in this place. And I know I said it, that especially that first week, I could feel God's Holy Spirit there. And it's that assurance when we can gather together. However, God is not a God of one place. Now, let me back up for just a second. Remember what we said. God said, I promise I will be with you wherever you go, right? God is not a God of one place. And this is something that I'm learning so much, and I think all of us are learning. I've had conversations with lots of pastors about this. We must guard against a house of God mentality, that this isn't the only place to find God. I know we're all missing the house of God, but have you found God's house along your journey?
Well, this past weekend, Sunday service, you don't know it, Thomas, but you were blasted all over Jordan Lake, because we were out on the Redneck Yacht Club and I Bluetoothed your sermon to the boat speakers, and everybody at Jordan Lake got a good old sermon. So that's your fault. So clearly we found a house for God outside with a lot of other people. And although what you were saying about it can be distracting, there's, people who are crazy on the lake and things like that, definitely distracting, and makes me long for our sanctuary. But at the same time, he can be anywhere. We can worship anywhere. And this is so needed right now.
Yes. Other thoughts there?
So completely interesting here thinking about this. I think probably those of us at home on Sunday morning while you were at church or wherever we were, we're all missing being physically in church as well with other people, but we're missing being in church while you were in church and missing all of us. So, in reality, we're all missing each other. So, right, it isn't just a location. I think it's the location it's the people around you. It's not the location of where you are. Not your physical location, so to speak.
Okay, absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm sure many of y'all have seen the things on Facebook. The church has been deployed. The church is not a place. It's a body. It's the people, But there's so many different things that are reminding us that, yes, God is everywhere. And we do specifically miss our sanctuary, our place of worship, God's house. But we can't stop looking for God's house or pretend that God's house is just there. That's not the only place we can find God. He is with us wherever we go. We fall into this trap, though, as well as Christians. I fall into it as a preacher. Where are you supposed to be on Sunday mornings? You're supposed to be at church, but you're supposed to be where God wants you to be, you know? And if there's a family member that's sick, that's God's house. If you're the one that's called to care for that person, and we feel guilty about that, we feel like we're letting God down, but God says, wait a minute, you're doing what I asked you to do. You cannot let me down. And if you're doing what I ask you to do, and finding me where you are. Any other thoughts there?
Well, in some ways, when I was first looking at what you have up here, it reminded me a lot of my friends and stuff. I grew up with a lot of people who are Catholics. And you talk about rosaries and prayer beads, and when you're talking about, you know, when you go to a place doesn't necessarily have it. It can be wherever you are, and sometimes the ritual of prayer would bring the order and the discipline and the focus and your tangible aspect of worship would have a cross, you know, and that would assure you that God was there with you. So, you know, it doesn't have to be a group of people, but anywhere that you feel that prayer and that presence of God and that you focus on it, and that's a place of worship.
That's great. Let me piggyback on that. Have any of you found some different things that you've used, or different things that you've like discovered as you've gone through this process? Have you found different ways of finding sanctuary in your home or in your backyard or on Jordan Lake, or any specific things that you feel like this has helped me connect to God while I haven't been able to go to church? I guess that's my question.
Ben's Bible study group, his BSF group, and all, he's a leader for them. And we went through setting up the Zoom thing for him to conduct his leaders meetings through that. And we held the first one of those last Monday night. And it was like our kitchen all of a sudden became the sanctuary, because that's where we were conducting it from. And, you know, I don't ever really think of my kitchen and my dining area being God's sanctuary. But there we were, you know, teaching God's lessons. And I think he's with us anywhere where we are going and trying to reach and trying to do his word, and where we are trying to worship him in any way.
Absolutely.
I think the problem is we don't slow down enough to realize that he's at our side.
Somebody told me today, Janice, too, I hope that when life gets quote back to normal, that we still are able to slow down some. That we continue to learn these lessons, like that we, you know, God is teaching us lessons, right? And so many times we learn the lesson for the test, and then when we pass the test, we're like, all right, I don't have to think about that again, you know, and that sort of thing. But these are life lessons that we need to continue to carry on there. So, let's keep on going here. A good reminder for our journey. Now, when I read this quote from the commentary, I thought it was just really powerful. The rhythms of the ancestors include the rhythm of journeying and worship. Their journeys are punctuated by moments of worship at specific places. You think about Abraham, especially, and Isaac as well, and now Jacob. All of these ancestors, they would go on these long journeys, and they would stop at this specific place and set up an altar and say, God, thank you for this. And they would journey and worship at specific places. Yet, the place never becomes a final objective. And this is where I think we can be guilty as Christians. I think going to church can become our final objective. Are you a Christian? Yep, I'll go to church. And that's not the final objective, where one settles in. I think that's supposed to be it. It provides sustenance. Yeah, it provides sustenance for the ongoing journey. So our moments of worship are to continue to fill us up and lead us as we go throughout this journey, and give us strength for the journey. And so I don't know. When I just read that, the place should not become the final objective. Once again, I can't wait to get back together in our sanctuary. And yet, when we come back, we don't just check that box and say, yep, now we're done, right? It's all about continuing on the journey and finding that sustenance. Any other thoughts or comments about that quote there?
I heard a minister today on a different Zoom thing, and they were throwing around ideas, and they said this has kind of forced everybody to think about ministry differently and to think about connecting with other people differently. But he mentioned how he hoped by September calendars would not go back to the status quo, and we do this because this is how we had always done it before, but to look at our faith in the same way as we might be back in the church by then. But what are we continuing to do to stretch ourselves and to grow ourselves and to become closer connected to others and to God, and not just flip the light switch back the other direction and fall into the same routine and rut that we had been in? Because this has made a lot of people get out of that. I mean, good or bad or ugly, we've had to face that. And so what is that going to look like, and not to just go back to doing the same old, if we can find some good things to take along with us to provide that sustenance and continuation.
Absolutely. We do like our routines. We like the continue, like we know what to expect. And there's nothing wrong with routines in and of themselves. But I think, like you're saying there, Allison, sometimes we lock ourselves in and we stop dreaming about what God wants us to do because we just settle for the routine. I've never really thought about the opportunity of everybody having something different for communion, because it's not logistically, it just doesn't work, right? Everybody needs to get the same thing for communion, but we sat down and we're like, we have to have communion. How are we going to do communion? So we had to dream. And as you dream, the idea that, wow, everybody's communion, God is speaking to everybody and giving their communion, giving them for communion what they need specifically. And in communion is a part of what their life is. And that's there's a powerful message in that. So I think you're exactly right, Allison. We're all having to learn how to reconnect to people, but we don't need to just, when we get back, just go back. It doesn't have to be status quo. Just continuing on. All right. Well, just one last slide before our conclusion. God chose Jacob, y'all. Now, this part really just got my attention, because Jacob at this point is nothing but deception, deceit, and dishonest. That's all he is. All he's done to this point is lied and tricked and done everything he could to be a rotten person, and God chose him. It gives me hope, right? I'm not worthy of God to choose me, and we're all sinners saved by grace, but sometimes I look at God and like, man, really? This grace? Really? You're going to give me this grace right now? But it is a powerful reminder for us that God did choose him. He did not give up on him, even though there was nothing lovely in him to be chosen right at this moment. God knew that he was going to use him for the blessing, and like he already promised, to be a blessing for all nations on earth. Conclusions. Look for God in ordinary places. Make sure that you're keeping your eyes open in the ordinary things, especially during this quarantine. He may show up in a way that you would never expect, and we've slowed down enough now to maybe hear him. even more. God is speaking. We need to listen. We need to realize that God is speaking into our ordinary days. And this, going back to the promises, God is watching over our present and our future. I didn't mention this earlier, but in his response, he said, God, oh, by the way, also please give me food and clothing for the journey. I don't know if anybody else heard that. God promised 8 different things, but he specifically said, I want to make sure I've got something to eat and something to wear as well. But God is watching over our present needs and our future. And I find so much comfort in that, knowing that he is watching over that. We need places of worship along our journey. Find places where you are. We've gone on more walks as a family, and those walks can be places of worship. Find a place in your house where when you are ready to pull your hair out, you need to unplug. Find a place in your house where you can go and you can stop what you're doing and focus on God. If we're not careful, if you keep listening to the news, it's going to build up on your soul and it can overwhelm our spirit. But we need places of worship along this journey. And you've got to go outside some. You've got to keep your social distance, but make sure that you're finding places to worship God. And then finally, God chooses us, warts and all. Just a wonderful reminder that he is continuing to love us in spite of our sin, in spite of our difficulties there. Thoughts, comments? All right. Well, y'all, I am so grateful for the opportunity to fellowship with you, to study together, to see some faces, and just to spend time together. Continuing checking on people. If you anybody that wants to make any more face masks, I know hospitals and doctors' offices are still accepting face masks for those things. Meals on Wheels. Most of our Meals on Wheels volunteers are in at-risk categories. So obviously all the folks that are receiving the meals are in the at-risk category, but most of the volunteers are as well. So if you're not in an at-risk category and you can deliver some Meals on Wheels, I know that they are needing volunteers, a lot of volunteers right now, and we put that in the email as well. And I feel like there was something else I was going to mention as far as helping others. Allison, help me if I'm missing anything there.
There are 4 listed on the website.
Okay.
At least whatever they were, they're listed on the website under the
That's right.
links for COVID responses and the links to the Zoom. At the bottom of that page are 4 things, 4 ways for people to engage.
That's right. Also, in case anybody wasn't on here right at the beginning, we are going to do communion on Sunday, so make sure you have something to have for bread and for juice. Whatever that is for you is going to be completely fine, and I'll talk about that on Sunday when we get to that time of the service. But it'll be a unique time to share the Lord's Supper together. We will have Maundy Thursday service next Thursday night. We're going to do that with Neels Creek, the Methodist Church. I think they're going to kind of do something a little bit different this year, which is completely fine. But we've got to do Maundy Thursday so that we can close out our Lenten wreath. If we don't have that, then we won't be able to close that part out. So it will be we're going to kind of have a Tenebrae-esque part, and just so that y'all know. Well, I guess we won't do a Zoom call next Wednesday. I guess we can, or we can talk about that. We'll put that out. We can still have Zoom. I mean, let's still have Zoom. That won't. I'm not asking you to come out to church 2 nights in a row. Just tune in 2 nights in a row, and then the Monday Thursday will be recorded as well. Of course, this is recorded too, but we will we'll have a Tenebrae time just to close out our Lenten wreath, and that'll be a very special worship time of worship there. But I'm just grateful for you guys and thankful for our church. And we can continue to be connected during this time of social distancing there. So, any other thoughts or comments? Very good. Well, let me say a quick prayer for us. God, we love you. We thank you for all that you've done. I thank you for our church and ask, God, that you continue to bless our church, bless our congregation, Lord, and help us all to be your hands and feet. Help us to listen and learn during this time. And Father, lead us and guide us every step of the way. We love you. We thank you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right. Well, y'all, I'm going to stop the record. I hope everybody has a great night.